Hi, guess what? We're up to the final video of the decimals video series. This is video 10, dividing decimals. Okay, when we divide decimals, when we're dividing by a whole number, we will divide the digits normally and just make sure that the decimal point in our answer goes above the decimal point in the question. Have a look at an example to show us all about it. 6.52 divided by 5. We're dividing a decimal by a whole number here. I'm just going to set it out like a normal short division there. 5 dividing into the 6.52. Now the 5 goes into the 6 once with one remainder. Now what happens with that decimal point? It goes directly above where it was in the question. So the next thing we put in is the decimal point. Then we say to ourselves, 5 goes into 15 3 times. 5 goes into 2, well, it doesn't really. So we need to carry that 2 over. We're allowed to put an extra 0 at the end of any decimals. We've seen that in previous videos in this series, if we need to. So by putting that extra 0 there, we can carry that 2 over and ask ourselves, 5's dividing into 20 goes 4 times. So a couple of things happened there. We divided the digits pretty normally, and the decimal point in our answer went above where it's positioned in the question. We did also add a 0 because it helped us to complete the answer there. Now, when we're dividing a decimal by a decimal, it's a bit tricky. We have to do some preparation work first. Before we start, when we're dividing a decimal by another decimal, we need to move both decimal points in our question numbers, to the right until the second of the numbers, the number we're dividing by, ends up being a whole number. It'll be clear once we do this example. We've got 36.548, that's one decimal, being divided by 0.04, another decimal. We can't just straight out start dividing there. What we need to do is we need to move both decimal points one spot to the right and then another spot until that second number there becomes a whole number. If the decimal point is off to the right of that 4, we can just write that down as a normal 4. And so once that second number has become a whole number, then we can start dividing using that previous method we were talking about, because then we've got a decimal divided by a whole number, which was what we looked at in the previous example. So interesting system there. We're allowed to move the decimal point in both of them across to the right. Effectively, if you think about it, what we're doing is to multiply 10 by 10 on the first number and the second number, and we're allowed to do that in both numbers. So once we've adjusted that to become a decimal being divided by a whole number, we're just doing it in a very similar way to what we did in the previous example. 4 is dividing into that. Now 4 into 3 doesn't go, but 4 into 36 goes 9 times. I've just got the rule on our screen there just to help you remember what we did in the previous one. The first step was to divide the digits normally, so that's what we're doing now. 4 into 36 goes 9 times. Now 4 into that next 5 goes once with one remainder. 4 into 14 goes 3 times with a 2 remainder. Now as far as we've got up to where the decimal point is in our question, and the decimal point in our answer goes above where the decimal point is in the question, so we'll just make sure we don't forget to pop that in there. And then the last bit, 4 into 28 goes 7 times. So interesting. We've divided a decimal by a decimal, but first we had to move the decimal points across to the right, made sure we did it in both of our numbers until the second number became a whole number, and then we could use our first method to complete our answer there. Bit tricky, but once we've adjusted those decimals so that one of them the second one becomes a whole number, then we're back to our first method there. Okay, so dividing decimals. Before we start, if we're dividing a decimal by a decimal, we move the decimal points across to the right in both of the numbers until the second number becomes a whole number. Then we've got our normal method of dividing a decimal by a whole number by dividing the digits normally and making sure our decimal point just goes above where it was in the question. Okay, there we have it. That's the end of our decimals video series. I hope you enjoyed that and you got a lot of learning out of it. If you want to have a look at any of those videos over and over again, that'll help your understanding, and ask your local maths teacher if you have any questions from that. Thanks a lot for watching my videos. I hope they help.